Welcome to Kasparov's Immortal, the game widely considered the greatest chess game ever played. On January 20th, 1999, at the Hoogovens tournament in Wijk, Garry Kasparov, the 13th world chess champion and arguably the greatest player of all time, sat down across from Veselin Topalov, one of the world's elite grandmasters. What followed was a rook sacrifice of breathtaking audacity, launching a king hunt that chased Topalov's king across the entire board, from a7 all the way to a1. Kasparov calculated roughly 15 moves ahead to see the forced win. This is chess at its most spectacular. Garry Kasparov opens with king's pawn to e4, his bread and butter, seizing central space from the very first move. Topalov replies with z6, signaling the Pirc defense. He invites Kasparov to build a big center, planning to strike at it later. d4, establishing a classical pawn center with pawns on e4 and d4. Kasparov is happy to occupy the center. Knight to f6, developing a piece and pressuring the e4 pawn. This is the standard Pirc setup for black. Knight to c3, defending the e4 pawn and continuing natural development. White's center is solidly supported. g6, preparing to fianchetto the dark-squared bishop to g7. This is the heart of the Pirc defense. Black aims for a hyper-modern approach. Bishop to e3, developing actively and supporting the d4 pawn. Kasparov avoids the most theoretical lines and keeps things flexible. The bishop fianchettos to g7, a powerful diagonal piece that exerts long-range pressure on the center and queenside. Queen to d2, connecting the rooks and preparing the possibility of bh6 to trade off black's fianchettoed bishop. Key idea in this setup. Gx, solidifying the center and preparing a potential b5 pawn advance. Topalov plays flexibly. f3, reinforcing the e4 pawn and preparing a possible g4 advance. Kasparov builds a rock-solid center before launching any attacks. 5, an ambitious queenside advance. Topalov immediately fights for space on the wing, a typical Pirc strategy. Knight to e2 rather than f3, keeping the f-pawn's advance open and heading for better squares. Flexible development by Kasparov. Knight to d7, developing the queenside knight. Black plans to reroute pieces and prepare the central break with a5. Bishop to h6. Kasparov immediately targets the dark-squared bishop. Trading it will leave black's kingside permanently weakened. Topalov has no choice but to exchange bishops. After this trade, the dark squares around his king become vulnerable. The queen recaptures on h6, a menacing post. From here it eyes the kingside and prevents black from castling short safely. Bishop to b7, developing and connecting to the center along the diagonal. Topalov must continue developing despite the positional concession. a3, a quiet but deep prophylactic move. Kasparov prevents any b4 tricks and prepares to castle queenside without worry. f5, Topalov strikes at the center. This is the thematic Pirc break, challenging White's powerful pawn duo. Kasparov castles queenside, tucking his king away and activating the rook on the d-file immediately. The stage is set for a middle-game battle. Queen to a7, connecting the rooks and supporting the a5 pawn. Topalov prepares to castle queenside himself. King to bone, a standard safety move in opposite-side castling positions. Kasparov removes his king from the c-file before the fireworks begin. a6, supporting the b5 pawn and preparing to expand on the queenside. Both sides are marshalling their forces. Knight retreats to Cone, heading for b3 or d3. Kasparov is rerouting his pieces to optimal squares, with deep strategic patience. Topalov castles queenside. Both kings are now on the same side, which fundamentally changes the character of the position. Knight to b3, reaching an excellent square where it supports d4, and eyes the c5 and a5 squares. Kasparov's pieces are harmonizing beautifully. Topalov captures on d4, opening the center. This relieves some tension but also opens lines that Kasparov can exploit. Rook captures on d4, occupying the open file with a powerful centralized rook. White's pieces are all pointing toward black's position. c5, kicking the rook and gaining space. Topalov fights back actively, trying to challenge white's central dominance. The rook retreats to done, staying on the open file. Both rooks are now stacked on the d file. Tremendous pressure. Knight to b6, rerouting to more active squares and potentially targeting the d5 square. A reasonable defensive move. Key, preparing to develop the light-squared bishop to h3 or g2. Kasparov methodically improves his position before striking. King to bait, a useful safety move getting off the c-file. Topalov senses the coming storm and tucks his king away. Knight to a5, a powerful outpost move. The knight is untouchable here and puts enormous pressure on b7 and shanks. This is a menacing piece. The bishop retreats all the way to e8, a sad necessity. The knight on a5 has driven it to the corner where it sits passively. Bishop to h3, now aimed directly at the d7 square and beyond. Kasparov's pieces are all trained on black's position like searchlights. d5. Topalov lashes out in the center, trying to break free before Kasparov's bind becomes suffocating. A brave, but desperate decision. Queen to f4 with check. Kasparov repositions his queen to a dominating central square, while gaining a tempo with the check. The king retreats to a7. Already the black king is beginning to look exposed on the queen side. The other rook enters the game on Ione. Both rooks, the queen, the bishop, and the knight are all in the fight. Total mobilization. d4, pushing the pawn forward. Topalov tries to disrupt white's coordination, but Kasparov has calculated everything. Knight to d5. A thundering centralization. The knight is an absolute monster in the heart of the board, attacking multiple targets. Topalov has to capture the knight, but this opens lines that Kasparov will use to devastating effect. Pawn takes on d5, opening the e-file for the rook. The passed d5 pawn is also a powerful asset. White's attack is building to a crescendo. Queen to d6, defending and blockading the passed pawn. Topalov tries to hold things together, but the storm is about to break. Rook takes d4, the sacrifice that defines this game. Kasparov gives up a full rook to blast open every line toward the black king. This move has been called the greatest move of the 20th century. The depth of calculation here is staggering. Kasparov saw roughly 15 moves ahead from this position. Topalov accepts the sacrifice. He has no real choice. Declining would leave him with a hopeless position anyway. Rook to a7 with check. The king hunt begins. This devastating rook invasion tears through black's position. The 7th rank is breached, and the black king will find no safety anywhere on the board. The king flees to b6, beginning what will become the most famous king march in chess history. The black king is being driven into the open. Queen takes d4 with check. Kasparov's queen joins the attack with devastating force, driving the king further from safety. Every move is a hammer blow. The king takes the knight on a5, the only legal move. Topalov's king has been driven from a7 to b6 to a5, marching into the wilderness. b4 check. A brilliant pawn sacrifice. Kasparov hurls another pawn into the fire to keep the king hunt going. Every white piece and pawn is fuel for the attack. The king stumbles to a4, now deep in enemy territory. The black king is 4 squares away from where it started, and the hunt is far from over. Queen to c3, threatening K1 checkmate and keeping the king trapped. Kasparov weaves a mating net with surgical precision. Topalov captures the d5 pawn, picking up material and trying to create some counterplay. But Kasparov's attack is unstoppable. Rook to a7, a rook lift that attacks the a6 pawn and keeps the black king boxed in. The noose is tightening. Bishop to b7, trying to block the rook's attack and defend, but there are too many threats to handle. Rook takes the bishop on b7, eliminating a key defender. Kasparov sacrificed a rook earlier, and now his remaining rook is worth an entire army. Queen to c4, desperately seeking counterplay. Topalov threatens back-rank ideas, but Kasparov has everything under control. Queen takes the knight on f6, winning more material and maintaining the attack. White is now collecting pieces while keeping the king trapped. The king takes on a3. Topalov's king has now traveled from a7 to b6 to f5 to a4, and now to a3, 5 squares into enemy territory. An incredible journey. Queen takes a6 with check. The queen sacrifice tempo keeps the king hunt alive. Kasparov is relentless. Every check drives the king deeper into the abyss. King takes the b4 pawn, pushed ever further. The black king is now on d4, an almost surreal square for a king to occupy in the middle game. e3, with check. Another pawn sacrifice, this time shattering any illusion of shelter. Kasparov throws everything he has at the fleeing king. The king takes on c3. Topalov's king has crossed the entire board, from a7 past the 4th rank, and now on c3, deep in white's half of the board. Queen to a1 with check. An astonishing move. The queen delivers check from the corner, driving the king toward the center of the board. The geometry of this king hunt is breathtaking. King to d2. The black king is now on the 2nd rank, having traveled 7 squares from its starting position. This is beyond anything seen before in Grandmaster chess. Queen to b2 with check. Kasparov keeps the pressure on, never letting the king find rest. The queen herds the king like a sheepdog. King to d1. The black king is now on white's back rank, a1's neighbor, having made an epic journey of 9 squares. a7, b6, a5, a4, a3, b4, c3, d2, done. Unbelievable. Bishop to f1. Kasparov calmly brings his bishop back to block any escape, cutting off the e2 square. Quiet precision amidst chaos. Rook to d2. An active defensive try. Topalov desperately seeks counterplay, but the king on d1 is fatally exposed. Rook to c7. Kasparov offers a rook exchange that simplifies into a completely winning position. The technique is flawless. The rook exchanges on 7. With queens and 1 rook each gone, you might think the attack would fade, but Kasparov has calculated everything to the end. Bishop captures the queen on c4 tortai. White has won the queen for a rook and is up a massive amount of material. The game is decided. Pawn recaptures on c4, creating a passed pawn. It is black's last hope, but it is far too little, far too late. Queen takes the rook on height, winning even more material. Kasparov is mopping up with total control. Rook to d3. pushing the passed c-pawn from behind. Topalov fights on with characteristic determination. Queen to 8, centralizing and preparing to deal with the passed pawns. Kasparov has everything under complete control. E, pushing the pawn forward. This is Topalov's only hope. Can the c-pawn and the active rook create enough trouble? Queen to f4 with check. Kasparov checks the king, keeping total control of the position. The king is driven further from the passed pawn. King to a1. The black king has completed its full journey, from castled on sate to a7, then all the way across the board to a1. 10 king moves in total during this game. Extraordinary. Power, calmly advancing. Kasparov creates his own passed pawn potential, while keeping black's counterplay contained. No rush. Technique is everything now. 5. Trying to blockade White's kingside pawns. But with so much material deficit, it is merely delaying the inevitable. King to cone, stepping out of the way and preparing to deal with the c-pawn. Kasparov's king is perfectly safe. Rook to d2, maintaining activity. Topalov refuses to give up, showing the fighting spirit that makes him a great champion in his own right. Queen to a7, and Topalov resigns. The position is utterly hopeless. White will queen, a pawn, or deliver checkmate. What a game! Kasparov's Immortal, the greatest chess game ever played. A rook sacrifice, a 15-move king hunt across the entire board, and a display of calculation that remains unmatched in chess history. And that is Kasparov's Immortal, one of the most extraordinary chess games in history. The rook sacrifice on move 24 opened the floodgates, and the king hunt that followed is simply without parallel. The black king traveled from a7 to b6, a5, f4, a3, b4, c3, d2, done, and finally a1, an incredible journey of 10 squares across the entire board. Kasparov's depth of calculation, his willingness to sacrifice material, and his relentless pursuit of the king make this game a monument to attacking chess. Regularly voted the #1 greatest game of all time, Kasparov's Immortal reminds us why chess is called the royal game. Want to play and improve your own chess? Visit chess99.com. Free, fast, and fun chess for everyone.